Okay, we are back. This is Senate Institutions. It's Tuesday, April 27th, and now we are looking at H 559, an act related to the parole board. And our first witness, Mary Jane, I think it would be the director of the parole board. And we are discussing one section of the bill. One item. So,
Right.
do you want to identify yourself?
Yeah. Good afternoon, Mary Jane Ainsworth, the director of the parole board. Thank you for having me. I have on my screen the email that I sent all of you last week. I had listened to some of the testimony that Director Pullman had given the committee, and some thoughts that I had around it that I think I had gone over with Director Pullman, but I was not part of the victim notification task force or sought input regarding this piece. So I just wanted to bring to your attention just some thoughts that the parole board has on this.
Excuse me one second, do you have, are you okay to put it on?
I can just a second, I will have to
Put it on the screen.
to connect to Zoom. Unless Lindsay has the email.
I can send you a link to join.
Okay, I think I have the link from this morning. It was just a matter of, give me 1 second and I can get on.
And we might want to put that link or the content in on our website.
All right, anyone? That's been prepared to.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. I didn't get myself prepared to share this today.
You might be able to.
I shut him off. There. I apologize. I'm in sharing mode a lot, so I try to prevent that. Just a little background for the committee. It's the policy of the board to treat victims and survivors with respect and sensitivity, and to ensure that those impacted by crime are informed of and able to participate in the board's processes. The board values and actively considers input from crime victims. So I had previously reviewed the two statutory references that Director Pullman had brought forward to all of you last week, and I'm just trying to. One was around 28 VSA 507, in the parole board statutes, notification to victim and opportunity to testify, and then there's one in 13 VSA 5305, information concerning release from custody. 13 5305 is a statute regarding victims, and in our opinion at the board, having this in one place feels like it would be a better option than having this information in two. As we can see, both of these have slightly different information in them. But definitely would defer to Ledge Council for opinions on that. 'Cause I am not an attorney, neither is the board, but these were just some thoughts of incorporating the language that is in the 28 statute into the 13 statute to make it more inclusive. And this would also give the victims of crime one area in statute to go look for information versus two, and be less confusing. So that would be our thoughts around this, really looking out for the victims, because they've often been traumatized many times, and we often hear from victims at hearings sometimes that it's hard to get the information that they need or to be heard sometimes. And we
Yeah.
like to make it as simple as possible for them.
Thank you. I think all of our statutes should be as simple as possible, but
Yep.
especially for folks who
Yep.
are traumatized.
So,
Okay, so do you want to go through this?
so basically, our thoughts were to repeal 28,507. I don't know what it entails to repeal, so I look forward to hearing some information on that, and then incorporating the missing language. The language is in the 28 statute into 5305, and as you can see, the underlying language is the language that I found that to differ.
Okay, that looks very reasonable. Do we have questions?
I think it's most appropriate. So
Okay,
So that's where I would defer at this point too.
Okay.
I just wanted to pass along our thoughts to this committee as well.
and did you have time to actually go to the parole board? This,
We've talked about this previously because this was in some draft legislation. This was one area that I had already explored prior to the legislative session, and some draft parole board changes that I had brought up to the governor's office and to Human Services.
okay, great.
I do have another question. You mentioned Jen Holman earlier. Has she seen this?
I think I've shared it with her once or twice. I cannot 100% remember if I shared this with her, but I know I discussed it with her at one time, and that was a while ago. I think that was before the victim notification task force really got going.
And we'll definitely get her in to get her opinion before we do. Okay, thank you. If you can just stick around, that'd be great.
Of course. Stop sharing.
Right, good afternoon. For the record, Hillary Cheddar Ames, the Office of Legislative Counsel. So just to kind of table set and make sure the committee is all on the same page about kind of the decision here. We have two options. We have the option that Jennifer Pullman put forward, and we have kind of option or approach that Mary Jane has just put forward. As you'll remember, we have two provisions, one in Title 13, one in Title 28, and they both have language about victim notification related to parole board hearings. That's because Title 13 has a victim generally related chapter, and Title 28 is in a parole board chapter. The ask from Jennifer Pullman and the center, and I think from the report, is that they would like to see the language about victim notification be consistent between those two sections. So Title 28 has an opt-out. The department has to notify, Title 28 has an opt-out. DOC has to notify victims unless they waive that notification. Title 13, it's with respect to prosecutors, but it is that victims must opt in. So instead of the requirement that prosecutors notify and they can opt out, victims have to opt in. So Jennifer Pullman's request was, let's make sure that it's opt out in both places. As I understand it, Mary Jane's proposal is consistent with that. So both on the same page about making sure that it's opt out. The decision for the committee is either, well, there are a couple options, but Jennifer Pullman's proposal was to copy just that language from Title 28 and put it in Title 13. There would still be victim notification related language in Title 28, and the kind of related language would also be in the Title 13 section. So make the change where it needs to be made to be consistent, but keep it in both places. As I understand Mary Jane's proposal, it is to move that language from Title 28 into Title 13 and remove that from Title 28. So at the end, you still get the same outcome. The victim notification language would be opt out, but it would just live in Title 13. So that's the decision. I guess a couple notes on that. I would not recommend repealing the section in Title 28 because there are a couple other provisions there that aren't limited to victim notification that you'd want to keep in. So there's a section in there that says parole board hearings or meetings are subject to the open meeting law. Unless you intend to take that requirement away, we want to leave that in Title 28. So I think the way I recommend kind of modifying Mary Jane's proposal, if that's the one the committee wants to move forward with, there would still be at 28 VSA section 507. It would just have fewer provisions. One option also is to avoid duplicating the exact same language, but to leave something in Title 28 about victim notification. You could move the detailed language to Title 13 and leave in that Title 28 a cross-reference. So it would say victim notification shall be conducted in accordance with 13 VSA 5305. So it's really a policy question for the committee policy choice about how you want victim notification provisions to be reflected in one or both of these titles. I do recommend hearing from Jen Pullman, since the request initially from her was to copy it, just to hear if she sees particular value in having something in both places. If she thinks that a cross-reference in Title 28 is still, kind of a good sign for anyone looking for further information here. So happy to answer any questions.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So really, we're just, instead of duplicating the language, we're in one section, we're just saying to reference the language in the particular section. So in actuality, it is duplicating, but it's just saying, go here and, or.
That's one option. Yes.
And you, I know you can't say one or the other. But what? So I'm gonna
You can ask it too in a different way.
yeah. So, but and correct me if I'm wrong. You said duplicating the language. What was it? Pros and cons is in that having the language in one and in the other.
Yeah.
Basically, you're doing the same thing when you say reference it, but you're just not having the actual language.
Yep. So there are a couple principles at play.
Okay.
One is to make sure that the VSA is not like an entire wall of books. We generally think about like what's the simplest way to say something, and is there one really good place to put it?
Gotcha.
But sometimes it's also useful that if someone, especially a public reader, is like looking through part of the VSA on a certain topic, that they are able to find either right where they're looking or maybe in a cross-reference, all the information they need related to the topic. So here we have a Title 13 chapter that has lots of victim-related information. So if someone is looking for victim notification and victim-related information, it's all there in Title 13 in this chapter. But if someone's looking for parole board relating things, which does include victim notification, if they go to look in this chapter in Title 28, they'll see it all there. Cross-references are a way to kind of achieve simplicity while still making sure that if someone looks, they know where to go.
Yeah.
I think cross-references are really easy for lawyers to follow. And if I were a public reader, I would probably be like, why are you making me go look at this other statute? So maybe there's a maybe there's a value in having it in both places where it's could be deemed relevant in both places.
Okay.
But ultimately kind of a trade-off, I think. I've heard witnesses previously give testimony about especially kind of their constituents or their perspective, they're part of the public who might be accessing the VSA, what might be convenient for them, which I think is why it could be useful to hear from Jen Pullman to say, you know, folks who've been involved in victim notification report conversations, you know, they've either said or not that it would be useful to, you know, see it in multiple places, or not.
Okay, did you?
Well, I just, from my other experience, we never put the same note twice on a set of plans or in the specs, because that's where you end up with changing something and then you end up with a conflict between them.
Which
And
is
so,
happened here, I think.
we should say it once and then maybe reference it somewhere else, but never repeat it twice, because you're gonna end up somewhere down the line.
Is that like what my father said? Don't make me say it twice.
That's
Similar. No, I would think that Ledge Council would have some sort of policy on this.
I think it depends on the scenario. So
Okay.
no hard and fast rule. There are definitely places where statutes repeat similar or the same things. But it kind of it really depends on the nature of what's being repeated. I think the two considerations I think of most are simplicity, you know, keep the VSA small where possible, and also usability. So kind of weighing those two things, I think is at least the rule of thumb that I think
Okay,
for these decisions.
all right, so any other question?
I've got sort of a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Mary Jane's email cut out a whole subsection.
Yes.
Subsection C is where the Department of Corrections shall do the notifications in that victim notification statute. So you had mentioned earlier that it's about the prosecutors in Title 13, well, except for that subsection.
Which is DOC. Yeah.
About the parole.
Yeah.
Well, DOC rather than the parole board, and then Title 28, that chapter is all about the parole board.
Yeah.
And what I mentioned before, what I was concerned about is that the Title 28 notification doesn't say who needs to notify.
Mhm.
And my reading of it would be the parole board needed to notify, or at least make sure that they were notified, whereas Title 13 is the Department of Corrections. I understand the Department of Corrections is the one that's doing this.
Yeah.
But in Title 13, many of those requirements are the prosecutor's office. And this is a part of the discussion that was had during the victim notification task force,
Yeah.
who notifies whom. So I don't know if that throws another monkey wrench into it, but from my point of view, that subsection in the statute number in Title 13 shouldn't be there. It
Should not be there?
Should not, because it's Title 13 dealing with crimes and procedure for crimes. And then there's Title 28 that deals with DOC and the parole board. And it's the parole board that's doing the notification, and it doesn't really have to be the like, you can argue both ways for that, but that was just my take on how that should look. But to throw a whole other wrinkle into it, 28.
Thanks, Lord.
Yeah. Only on television. Title 28, section 50502A, that's not sub A, has another subsection where there's notification regarding the parole board.
Oh, and that's one that we haven't even talked about.
Right.
So what you talking about?
So, yeah, so I think all of this needs to sort of like be put into a blender and figured out. And part of it is to make sure the DOC is okay with statutorily being responsible for doing the parole board notifications, and that's a policy decision. And then we'd have to decide, you know, if we want to put the onus on DOC for that as a matter of law versus just how they do it now, and whether or not, whether we care if it's in Title 13 or Title 48.
So what got my ear was having one agency do something that's not their responsibility, that's a responsibility of a different agency. That doesn't,
But the parole board is sort of The
But they are separate.
DOC has to administer the parole board. I think you had discussed this the other day.
So the parole board is an independent entity, but for statutory organization purposes, it still lives in the DOC chapter. DOC still has, the DOC commissioner has a number of responsibilities related to the parole board. So I think the first part of your question and comment illustrates why there are sometimes provisions in two places. So to your point that, you know, this language about victim notification in Title 13 is about DOC. I think that's a reason why there is some language about it in DOC's title, in Title 28. I think so rationale for including the language in Title 28 is it's saying DOC has to do something. If the places where we tell DOC to do something in the BSA are in Title 28. I think a reason why there is still something in Title 13 is that kind of usability principle I mentioned earlier, that if you are looking for victim notification rules and information, it's really helpful if you can go to one place in the BSA and see all of it. And that, as I understand it, is currently what this Chapter 165 in Title 13 does. So I think that's the kind of some of the current reasons why it might be in two places. I agree with you that once the committee decides, I think, whether they generally want to approach keeping it in two places or consolidating into one, that there are a number of moving pieces. I actually think that right now there's a victim definition in the Title 28 provision that should probably also live in the Title 13 provision.
I was looking for that.
Yes, so I've made a number of notes along those lines that, you know, the kind of decision tree follows from the do we keep it in two places versus do we put it all in one? But that kind of primary decision will let me tee up a number of other changes to kind of implement that policy decision.
Okay. I think I agree with Senator Benson that wherever it lies, it should just be a cross-reference to the other one, so it's not, so the language isn't duplicated.
That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
Your opinion counts for a lot in this room.
You know, 20%. But in the end, I don't care if it's in Title 13 or Title 28, as long as it's consolidated and consistent, and parole boards, DOC are both in agreement on DOC being required to do the notification.
I would, but and that there be a cross reference.
And yeah,
That is certainly something I can implement, and I think you're flagging that, whether it's Jennifer Pullman and also DOC commenting on what makes sense for them, and specifically the piece about DOC being comfortable with the explicit statutory requirement in Title 28 that they are doing these notifications. It's in Title 13 right now, but that makes a lot of sense to me.
and also figure out if 502A messes everything up too, because there's another notification.
There are a couple notifications that I had looked at, or a couple references to victim, but I'll take a second look at 502A. Happy to do that.
And so I want to give the director opportunity, because it sounds like we're doing something that isn't what you were suggesting, but you might be okay with it.
I would be completely okay with it. I think it's
Okay, great.
I mean, I was just throwing something out there, but more of the simplicity and also just truing up the statutes is kind of, it was on a more of what we were thinking to try to make this cleaner.
Okay, good.
And I can also speak to the current process of notification if that's something you wanted to hear, or if you want to wait and get that from DOC.
Or why don't you?
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah, no, and let's make sure you're here, or
Yeah.
or do you want to hear it now?
why not?
Sure.
Okay.
I mean, if you know.
Or you're gonna have to hear it again, because that.
Yeah, so
If it's wrong,
That's fine.
If it's wrong, they'll let us know.
Well, DOC does all the victim notifications currently, or parole board hearings. Any parole hearing, they notify the victims. There's other subsequent hearings, but these statutes just talk about the parole, the actual parole hearings. They do the notification in conjunction with doing the parole summary that they submit to the board, because they're responsible for submitting a parole summary to the board with all the information, which then includes information around whether or not around contacting the victim, and if they'd like to provide testimony to the board, either provided to the board ahead of the hearing, or they let us know if they wanted to speak with the board either in private or during the hearing. And then if the board has no information, if notification has occurred, they may ask during the hearing, they may ask DOC if they need notification. And then if the board would like notification, we postpone the hearing, and DOC generally does those. Either using their victim services unit or the caseworkers and probation parole officers do that.
So, okay, go ahead, yeah.
And I might have misunderstood the
Yeah.
last part. You would, at the beginning, you had said that there's the parole hearing and then there's some other hearings afterwards. At the end, were you saying that the other hearings afterwards are what DOC further notifies?
No, so say, the other hearings I was talking about, sometimes during a parole violation hearing, if there's gonna be an interview of an individual, or if it's an early termination of parole, the victims may be notified as well. But
And who does that?
DOC does all the notifications. But but I'm talking about in parole hearings, if there's no evidence that notification has happened, the board may ask DOC, postpone their decision to ask DOC to notify the victim, it's another double check to make sure that the individuals involved have been contacted and are aware.
Yeah, go ahead.
You asked that they may postpone, is there a length of time that you generally, because on the other, the person we don't want to push back
Right.
for any substantial length of time, but their parole interview.
Generally, we'll postpone it for a month, but if notification occurs then, because we do these hearings via Microsoft Teams, we could get them on a schedule sooner than a month, depending on the nature of the case. Yep.
So, and then I just have a question about the notification itself, because I remember hearing about the electronic notification, how that's a problem. Is this notification, is it manual? I mean, does a person actually call a person?
I believe that I cannot 100% testify on. I know there's the automatic one that goes out around their minimum,
Mm-hmm.
but I believe there's also a letter or a phone call that is also sent out depending on what information DOC staff have in order to contact the person.
Okay, for these parole hearings.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so that's something I'll ask DOC.
Yep.
Okay. So you will be back, and you will be back, and we will also talk to Joan. Oh, anything else? Did you have? Okay, is that good? All right, thank you very much. And we will adjourn until 3.